Hey, good morning. Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you so much, Meg, the Valkyrie Project, Lincoln Labs, John. Thank you, everyone. I truly am so honored to be here this morning, to finally actually be at Lincoln Labs, like the historic place that I've heard about for years, working at BAE and certainly now Lockheed. So it's where cool stuff goes to get done, always behind closed doors. But here we are today, and this is equally cool as some of those classified programs. So as Kristen just said, today is International Women's Day. Great day for such an event like this, and I'm excited to see this project and this programming continue to grow over the next few years, and kind of to build on what you just said, see this whole room filled, with both additional really cool women, but allies and partners as well. So the theme for Women's History Month this year, as we kind of embark into International Women's Day is this, kind of the culmination here, but the theme is women who advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and then the IW theme is inspire inclusion. So very fitting, certainly, what we're talking about in a lot of these different discussions. It's amazing to see so many different service women represented here in the room. I love that there are kind of international women here as well. I heard some accents in the lobby, so that was great. But it's really the inclusion that's present here and just the concept of this program that inspires me. So, you all are kind of walking the walk, but we're also here together to build upon this energy and momentum, and that's meaningful. As women, I am always amazed by how many hats we all continue to wear. I mean, I certainly, have all of the above, spouse, mother, daughter, tutor, chef, family event planner, and the work doesn't end certainly when we're off the clock. I know all of you can relate to this as well, whether in uniform or out, there's always something to do. In fact, I am shocked. I guess good thing I left my phone in the lobby that some child or spouse or family member isn't pinging me to ask me where they're supposed to be at any given time or asking for a pickup of some kind. So when I'm not doing any of those roles, mother, spouse, daughter of an aging parent, I really do love being able to work for advocating in support of women in national security. These, much like Kristen, I think, mentioned earlier, it's like I've often been the only woman in the room. I've worked in national security now for 20 plus years and have certainly, been the only in a room working on defense issues, felt the challenges of speaking up against kind of a more empowered, homogenous group working alongside me. So for that reason, and many others, I believe in the value of building diverse teams, and know that it makes our national security stronger when all those willing to serve are given an opportunity to do so. So the data demonstrates this time and time again. Diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones, resulting in greater innovation, productivity, improved problem solving, higher job satisfaction, and certainly in the case of diverse teams of service members, and very relative today, enhanced combat capacity. To this end, it is a no-brainer, in my opinion, to promote the equity and inclusion of women in all of their diversity in the armed services. It is very much in our nation's security interest to have the best and brightest represented in a lethal fighting force that looks like America. So, as mentioned, I'm privileged to serve as the chair of the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services, also known as DACOWITS, a panel that provides policy recommendations to the Secretary of Defense that impact all women serving in the military across the services. So DACOWITS has actually been around for 70 years, although despite that lengthy history, many servicewomen are not aware of its existence or significant contributions to the advancement of women's career opportunities in the military. In 1948, following the end of World War II, President Truman signed the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, historic legislation that enabled women to serve as permanent members of the armed forces for the very first time. However, as many of you know, women's contributions to military service in the United States began long before they were granted official permission to serve. For over 240 years, nearly a quarter of a millennium, women have played an integral role in the success of the United States military since our nation's inception, serving during the American Revolutionary War, Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I. Prior to this recognition, women's service during World War I forced Congress and President Wilson to recognize that women's widespread participation and sacrifice during the war justified constitutional change. So in 1920, 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote, an important step. However, it was even more so at women's service during World War II as walks, WASPs, WAVES, Women Marines, and SPARs, also known as volunteers in the Women's Army Corps, Air Force service pilots, Naval and Coast Guard reserves, that finally swayed powerful leaders in Washington, D.C. to further recognize the valuable contributions of women's service to the military, and that they could also contribute during peacetime operations, not exclusively during times of war. Following the signing of the Integration Act, the Defense Department quickly realized they needed assistance recruiting women into a depleted World War II military to serve in a full-time capacity. So as a result, that was the start of DACOWITS. It was established in 1951 to assist with this effort. The committee serves as an independent entity composed of civilian women and men appointed by the Secretary of Defense that provides advice and recommendations on matter and policies relating to the recruitment, retention, well-being, treatment, education, and integration of all women in the armed services. Over the past 7 decades, DACOWITS has proven to be a valuable asset to the department, with approximately 95% of more than 1,000 policy recommendations having been either fully or partially adopted by DoD and the military services. I like to comment that, despite working in Washington, I don't know of any other organization that has that level of efficacy, 95% of the work they've done being effective and implemented. So for me, it was very much an honor to join a committee with a record like that, and certainly kind of feel like I'm just carrying forward and trying to protect a legacy that's already done so much for women serving. Despite that, the women that we're continuing to serve have constantly changing mission sets. We continue to fill this role with DACOWITS by ensuring women are provided opportunities to thrive and excel as leaders in all of the services. We've actually been at the front of a lot of emerging issues, bringing attention to the challenges, large and small, facing servicewomen, making recommendations early to ensure issues are addressed effectively and expeditiously. However, despite tremendous progress that's been made in the equity, diversity, and inclusion for women in the military, the critical work of DACOWITS is not finished. Behind the scenes, DACOWITS remains an instrumental voice for women serving in the military. Unbeknownst to most people, many of the significant policy changes over the years have been a result of the committee's research and recommendations to the Secretary of Defense. Longitudinally, DACOWITS has operated in parallel with women's progress in the military, often intertwined with the history of women's service, playing an essential role in many of the firsts, to include the integration of the military service academies in the 1970s, integration of combatant aircraft and combatant ships in the 1990s, and the elimination of the combat exclusion rule for women in 2016. Most recently, DACOWITS heavily contributed towards the abolishment of inequitable policies that were disproportionately and negatively impacting servicewomen, such as antiquated hair grooming standards that were causing alopecia, also known as permanent hair loss, cadets and midshipmen not being permitted to have children and forced to relinquish their parental rights or leave the military service academies, improvements to women's personal protective gear and equipment, which I know has been discussed here and I think more so today, which reduce injuries rates amongst the servicewomen, an elimination of separate maternity and paternity leave, resulting in the creation of a standardized general neutral parental leave for all service members. As of 2024, approximately 18% of the U.S. military are women serving, which is substantially lower than the demographics in America. DoD continues to experience higher attrition rates at various career points for servicewomen instead of servicemen, which suggests that the impediments that discourage retention for women are broader than simply starting a family. Moreover, with the opening of more than 200,000 combat roles to women in 2016, there's still a need for an independent entity like DACOWITS that can specifically review the impact and challenges of gender integration and provide mitigation strategies. Failure to identify and remedy the challenges affecting the service of women in the military actually negatively impacts the readiness of the force during a time when global security challenges are multiplying, and we need every single American that is able and ready to serve. A major tenet of the committee's work throughout history has been directly engaging service members during in-person visits to military installations. In my personal view, this is one of the best parts of this volunteer role, getting out of DC, going to installations across the country, and really being able to talk to women who are kind of walking the walk and hear about their lived experience in uniform. We're actually in the process of getting ready to head out on these visits again. We'll be visiting 11 installation visits representing each of the military services, to include the Coast Guard. Last year, I spent a lot of time with Marines, Also here with Dr. Montgomery. I know one of your speakers yesterday got to go to Camp Lejeune and then later to San Diego Marine Corps Recruitment Depot. Hoorah. And this year I'm excited to get to Peterson Space Force Base and the U.S. Air Force Academy. I'm married to a former Army officer, and I've graduated from the Naval War College, so I come from a little bit of a mixed experience and exposure to the military myself, but I'm slowly trying to round out my exposure with all of these visits. But hearing from individuals directly and being able to dispel the myth versus the reality of servicewomen's lived experience through thoughtful questions and being able to kind of look at it from all angles is just a real gift that helps to ensure our research really is informed and stands up to the test of time. Next week, the committee's new 2023 annual report will be published, and it will include 26 recommendations that address various issues impacting women's service in the military today. The historic progression of women's roles in the military has largely been prescribed by legislative reforms, which I'm proud to say the committee has been and continues to be a strong contributor, meaning when our annual report of policy recommendations becomes public, often those recommendations are turned into proposed legislation that are informed by our research. So in this role as chair of DACOITS, it is truly a great privilege to be a part of the important work being done on behalf of America's servicewomen. Each of you here has an important role to play. We've got to continue to elevate and improve women's time in uniform, whether by talking to family and friends about your experiences serving, speaking up to empower women, yourselves, and those that come behind you, and know that DACOITS has your back. We continue to advocate on your behalf and drive these important policy changes forward. So transitioning a bit from DACOITS, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of my time when I'm not volunteering, and that is in my role as Senior Vice President as the Government Affairs at Lockheed Martin. So a little bit of background on me. For 15 years, I worked in government and the nonprofit world, served on Capitol Hill, working for a Senate committee and later for a member of the House of Representatives. Then had the opportunity to join a presidential campaign, then transition team, and then finally was the White House National Security Liaison to Congress. And then after that was able to move over to the Department of Defense and work in the front office for 3 different secretaries of defense. As I said, I've often been the only in a room, many, many, many rooms. When I decided to transition to the public sector, the most important thing to me was continuing to feel tethered to that mission, that national security mission of serving country and others and continuing to keep the American people safe. So I had to figure out kind of what did that look like for me. As much as I love public service and want to continue in it for a lot of different reasons, family included. I had 2 kids while working in those roles, one at the White House, one at the Pentagon, and just was looking for a different kind of work-life balance. But looking around, to me, being able to work for a national security company, one that continues to be focused day in and day out on serving the warfighter, was the most natural choice for me. And certainly, I'm a big fan of innovation and technology, so kind of satisfy the inner geek in me as well. I love how invested our Lockheed team is in supporting service members and their families. We empower veterans during their transition to the civilian sector, honor the legacy of those who served. Veterans are truly the center, veterans and I should say active duty are at the center of everything we do. And in fact, 1 in 5 of our employees has served in uniform. Last year, we hired almost 3,800 veterans and participated in over 100 different transitioning military events. Again, to me, keeping us really close to that community that is so important. We also celebrate the invaluable contributions of servicewomen, female veterans, ensuring they have the resources and opportunities that they need and deserve. We actually have also collaborated with kind of the transitioning program. Obviously, being able to continue to serve is such a gift. And so, both sides of my brain are at work here. On the one hand, DACOITS is here to kind of ensure that all advancement is unimpeded, that we remove all obstacles for women continuing to advance and serve as long as possible. But there's also something great about being part of whenever the right time comes, being able to help transition folks into whatever comes next, especially something that's still, if that is, the interest, being tethered to the national security of our country. So working with the transitioning process, helping veteran-owned small businesses, there are lots of different ways that I feel that I continue to be able to contribute to that. I also, love being able to work with and alongside former operators, because I think that it actually helps to inform and better our products and capabilities, because that's ultimately what we're working for every day. There's not a day I go into work where someone doesn't actually talk about getting the equipment and the capabilities to the service members. And working in an organization that is so focused on that is just what gets me out of bed in the morning. So it's an honor to collaborate with the communities within DoD and Lockheed Martin that both are dedicated to making a meaningful difference in the lives of those who have selflessly served and are serving America. As I mentioned earlier, the theme for Women's History Month this year is Women Who Advocate for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So I'd like to close by sharing a quote that captures this theme. It's by First Lieutenant Anne Soshbrem from the Army Nurse Corps during World War II that remains just as noteworthy today. Let the generations know that women in uniform also guaranteed their freedom, that our resolve was just as great as the brave men who stood among us, and with victory our hearts were just as full and beat just as fast, that the tears fell just as hard for those that we left behind. Thanks again to the Valkyrie Project and to Lincoln Labs for hosting this powerful event. I'm happy in any of the time remaining to take questions about, frankly, any aspect of these issues, whether it's Dakowitz, kind of time in industry, but also just in general work on behalf of advocating for women and national security. Thank you.
I do have one that was pertinent from yesterday.
Sure, I have a question. Good morning.
Good morning.
What are the policies upcoming that Dakowitz has been working on to affect women in the military?
Great question, thank you. I really wish that I had the report rolled out already so I could talk about kind of these 26 recommendations. Actually, one of the highest number that has taken place in, it's not decades, certainly in recent years. We had a stand down for about really, a year and a half to 2 years. We had to basically stop all work. That was kind of during the presidential transition, and then they had to make a decision to restart all the committees. So it brought all the work of the committee during COVID and then plus the stand down pretty much to a halt for that time period. And so this was a bit of a catch up. So 26 different recommendations, everything from fully integrating, I should say. I'm looking at you here, Sidra. The Marine Corps combat training in terms of boot camp. We've got lots of policies on how to remove women's advancement due to, for example, pregnancy. How does pregnancy ultimately, when service members, do they lose access to an important, class or leadership program? Are they not then looked at for command? Maternity uniforms, for example. Anyone here seen the smock? That was a personal priority of mine of recommending that we eliminate anything that isn't tailored for a woman's body, but also to be able to continue to be active, comfortable, and fully able to serve, as opposed to kind of feeling that you're standing out from the crowd. We really covered anything and everything on the front of recruitment retention. We did a lot looking at kind of what are the active efforts underway that were successful in bringing more women in. And on our retention side, looking at everything from kind of what does the data show about women exiting, which, as I mentioned in my remarks, it seems to be oversimplified that women leave for family reasons. But when you unpack that data and you go down and you overlay it with the time frames, the MOSs, the different activities of what is driving women out, that is such an oversimplification of it. And so the committee is trying, with these recommendations, to delayer what does that data actually mean, and even trying to influence what are the surveys, what do the exit surveys ask, so that the data becomes a little bit more granular, and helps to then inform kind of the military leadership. I'll tell you, one of the recent conversations I had, I do office calls with all the service chiefs, and one of them that I sat down with recently, we were kind of talking about the history of Dakowitz and the recommendations, and this individual who was a man was like, I don't know, can you even really do anything about this? Is it even worth continuing to work at this stuff? And I was like, absolutely yes, and kind of started to just rattle off here all the different policies that if you had limitless resources and focus on these issues, you could make a difference. I mean, we all know things like, childcare, kind of access to, better health care, dual military kind of service issues, all the fitness standards in the sense that, some of the services have changed them, some are different. How does that impact women's service? I mean, there's just a multitude of things that when you look at it, there are ways to improve recruitment, retention, and advancement. So to me, that was a great kind of spur to action to come back, bring these recommendations back and say, here's 26 things that you can do to actually change things. So thank you. Sure.
It kind of gets at my question when we talk joint. As you know, Dakowitz makes these recommendations, but they might be implemented differently in the services. So it leaves a situation where we're creating inequity across the DoD because an airman may have a different benefit than a sailor, than a Marine, whereas we all raised our hand to protect and defend the same Constitution and our national security. So is that a concern for Dakowitz? And if so, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the inequities that creates as the services implement these recommendations in different ways.
So thank you. Actually, great question. And that is something we look at because we have made policies over the years that have been broad. You'll notice though over time, especially recently, and in this set of recommendations, it's much more tailored. It's really getting into things like that, where services do things differently and where it makes sense calling those differences out and urging equity in application across the boards and talking about why the disparity can either be, impacting recruitment, retention, for women in particular. And so I do think that it's something we have taken the time, done the research in all of these installation visits using the focus groups information to actually get the data where we see that, where we see the application, where it even might just be a policy is not fully explained perhaps. And so then there's uneven implementation commander by commander. So that is something that we definitely try to pull up both in our public meetings. We have 4 quarterly public meetings, and we have all the services represented that they're called to respond to different questions. And then we use a lot of that data as well as additional research in order to say, this doesn't make sense. How do we fix that? It's always going to be a work in progress, and it ultimately is up to the services, DoD, and then certainly if Congress agrees with that to kind of work and take those recommendations and the data provided in order to help even out those inequities. But I agree with you, it's really important, and the way that it's applied in different services can be challenging. Hi.
How much does Dakowitz and Women's Peace and Security interact, or are they more or less parallel type of organizations for different things? Can you explain that?
I love that question because that is, and I think I'm not getting ahead of things, because that is actually one of our study topics for this year. So I can't, because we've just begun our research year for the coming year, so it's not in our current recommendations. I think we've opined on it in the past in previous reports, but this year we're actually going to be looking at that. We identified it as a topic actually right before DoD also came out and said they were going to be kind of doing a check-in on what the status is across WPS compliance implementation following some of the legislation that's come out in recent years. So we're looking to it as how do we scope it also within the Dakowitz areas that I just mentioned. How do we actually make it meaningful and not kind of a, hey, let's take a glance across and see if people are checking, the boxes on these things. So I think we'll be able to answer that question much better within a year. It is a really relevant topic, and how we go about it, I think, if we can scope it correctly, that it'll actually be meaningful data. So more to follow on that one.